video actually started with me reaching out to the guys at Jamstik asking about its MPE capabilities. Cool. So as my channel is all about MIDI guitar and MPE and breath controllers and stuff like this, I obviously had a lot of questions about the Jamstik and to what extent that is an actual MPE controller. Which of the established MPE dimensions do the Jamstik actually use? For instance, the guys at Jamstik were incredibly forthcoming and they sent me one of their guitars to try out for myself. So in that respect, this is absolutely a sponsored video. I also told them I wouldn't make a video unless I feel I have something else to offer rather than just me playing this controller and making it work. I want to show this in a context that you perhaps haven't seen before. So I'm going to use this with a breath controller. I'm going to use third-party instruments a lot and control those with a breath controller just as I do my other setups. But I'm also going to use the breath controller to control the Jamstik app itself, and I'm also going to showcase exactly how much of an MPE controller this is and in what respect we can call it an MPE controller, and there's a discussion there to be had. I think this can be really interesting. Okay, so here I'm using the Ample Sounds upright bass, but I'm using it inside of JB Audio's MP5, which is a little piece of software that I use to prepare some of the instruments that aren't really 100% MPE instruments for an MPE controller. Let me give you an example of where I use a breath controller to control the dynamics. So it's really not that I'm playing the notes with so much different velocities. I make sure that every note comes through, but by using a breath controller I can control the dynamics in a more varied way and also control the notes on very soft dynamics. It should be obvious here that tracking isn't really a problem. Me having to be mindful of triggering the notes is always the case when I'm using a MIDI or MPE controller, as opposed to me using a guitar. Also listen for stuff like the vibrato here. This is at the heart of why I'm using a guitar as a MIDI or an MPE controller, controlling both the expression, the dynamics and the vibrato, everything at once. So I really shouldn't have to go in and do anything after having played stuff. Now I'm going to use the second gesture of my breath controller that has both a bite function and a breath function. So I can both breathe into my breath controller and control dynamics with how hard I breathe. But I can also bite down on my breath controller and trigger something else. And in this case, I'm triggering the overblow effect on a bass clarinet. Now, it might seem obvious to you how it is an advantage to use a breath controller for the expression on a wind instrument like the bass clarinet or with a trumpet I just used. But it's really no difference with instruments like violin that also needs some sort of expression. I mean, traditionally you would use your bow to create different degrees of pressure and also the attack to create different velocities, but also the harder you press your strings, there's going to be a very different sound from a very soft playing style, or depending on where you put your bow on your instrument, it's also going to affect how the sounds come out, of course. I don't have any byte assignments right here, but I'm using the sample modeling string ensemble, and I've set this up in Contact. So Contact isn't really an MPE environment at this time, but you can fake that by setting up on 6 instances in Contact and assigning different MIDI channels to this. Add something like the BlueArp Arpeggiator and keep your breath controller, and you get something like this. Now, everything doesn't have to be you're trying to emulate an instrument to perfection. So I wanted to try tapping on the Jamstik just to see if it responds equally as well as working with a pick. So the next example might seem a bit intimidating if you haven't set up with layers before. I'm using GigPerformer here, and there is something about setting up with a pedal that can hold some of the synths so that you can play stuff over that. So I'm using Synapse Hans Zimmer Legends and also Softtube Model 77. But on top of this, I'm using a SWAM soprano sax, and that's with a lot of things. I'm using the breath controller, of course, to control the expression for the soprano sax, but also to modulate some effects in some of the synths as well. You really don't need to know how I've set up, but this is the way it looks, and this is the way it sounds. Of course, a million ways to connect your Jamstik to any of the existing third-party instruments. To begin with, I just want to show you a possibility to use an external software to retune your whole fretboard while playing if you want to. Here I'm setting up in GigPerformer. I'm using the Jamstik and a breath controller straight into Serum, which is a synth that I can control with another piece of software. This is controlled by a protocol called MTS ESP, which helps me retune certain instruments, and I've connected a foot pedal to this. So I'll change the tuning as I press my foot pedal while playing. I'm also using the actual audio out from the Jamstik. So I'm using both the USB-C and the traditional audio out from the Jamstik together. And the audio I'm just simply putting through the Neural DSP Corey Wong X software. So. If you're completely new to this, it's maybe a mystery how you connect a breath controller to a Jamstik, for instance. But it's really not that complicated. In the normal case, you would run these in parallel. So, I mean, you connect your Jamstik to your computer via USB or Bluetooth or whatever. You do exactly the same thing with your breath controller. You connect that with the cable that it comes with, or Bluetooth, or perhaps Wi-Fi if you need an extended range. So these separate MIDI streams that comes from these different controllers, they never really meet until you sort of merge them inside your DAW, if it's Ableton, Reaper, Cubase or Logic. Or if you're using them directly into something like a standalone instrument, or like I will show you here, if you want to use the breath controller to affect or control a particular parameter within something like the Jamstik Creator app. You need to go into the menu up here and into Audio MIDI Preferences. You look for MIDI devices. In this case, I want my breath controller to be connected, and I also want the Jamstik to be connected so that both of these controllers can act as controllers for this particular software. They are, so that's okay. The next thing you need to do is to check something like MIDI assignments. You don't want to assign breath to something that they already use. If we look at the system assignments, we see that Jamstik already uses CC4, CC67 and CC7 here. Don't use any of these CCs for your external controllers. Here is the macro CC assignments, and a macro is a good thing because you can control several parameters at the same time. I've assigned my breath controller to the first macro, and I have the bite sensor on CC3 here. It's assigned to the second. Let me show you how easy it is to assign and unassign. I'll just click this to erase this previous assignment. Now there's nothing on macro 2. I click the MIDI Learn button and I bite down on this, and you should see that it says 3 undefined again, which it does. So this classic brassy saw is the perfect instrument to actually show you anything from. This instrument consists only of one sound source, and that's this saw wave up here. And this sound source have 3 tabs here, and it's a general, it's the envelopes, and it's the filter. The macro, as you see, macro 1 is already assigned to something. If I click on this, you see that it says oscillator, instrument, filter, cutoff here. And if I breathe into this, this will move. And you also see that this moves, but it also moves as I'm playing. It's not only my breath controller that affects this filter opening, it's also affected by the incoming MIDI messages from the Jamstik. Now I want to show you how to take control over this filter opening by using this breath controller. This first setting here is the baseline setting. So any control you want to have over it is increased by increasing this value here. We have the effect from the Jamstik, but I'm also affecting this filter opening by breathing into this breath controller. So I can extend the time when this filter is open. This first macro was already assigned, obviously, but I can assign my second macro here, which would be the bite. A new assignment is done by dropping this on top of any of these controllers. So I'm dropping this on this Q value here that also is related to the filter. So it says now oscillator filter Q value here. You can see the changes in the shape of this filter as well. When I'm biting down, you'll get this very increased peak. Breath will control its opening like this, and biting down will control the amplitude of this. So If I want some more effect from this, this is the first initial setting, and if this is at 12 o'clock, I will have no effect really by biting down on this. But increasing, you'll hear a different effect. Now, there's a second way of going about things here, of course. You don't necessarily have to use the macros. You can go directly by CCs. If you know that you've connected your breath controller to CC2, for instance, you can use this CC tab here. Assign in the same way. MIDI control is not set yet. If you know that you've used the standard CC for breath controller, which is CC2 in MIDI, you can click on this. You see that it says CC2 here, and it should already affect this frequency knob here. I can, of course, also connect to Q directly if I want to. So I have both the filter cutoff value and the Q value here. If I put both of those to breath control, I will, of course, control both of those values with the same action. As before, you can increase the amount of control. So if I wanted the Q value to be higher as I'm breathing into this, I'll just increase that. The same with the oscillator, of course. That's just another way of assigning these controls within this Jamstik Creator app. MPE can really be described as repurposing the MIDI protocol, but with a different distribution strategy or scheme for the MIDI channels. If you're at all familiar with MIDI, we have 16 MIDI channels to use. So with the legacy MIDI protocol, we're quite used to set up stuff like one keyboard with one instrument on one channel and perhaps another keyboard with another instrument on another channel. But with MPE, we've found a new way to work with these MIDI channels more effectively, get more out of them, if you will, by sending each note on its own channel. And this is so that we also can send each note's particular pitch modulation information and other modulation as well, along with it on that particular channel. So with that, we also get something like polyphonic bends. In MPE, we're now employing a specific strategy to these 16 MIDI channels. One is to be used as a global channel where we send information like sustain pedal or mod wheel perhaps, whereas the others are the information where we send note-specific messages like note on and pressure values and pitch bend information, stuff like this. And this global channel can be on MIDI channel 1 or MIDI channel 16, depending on what setup you're using. And with regard to this note-specific information that comes along with every note, we often talk about 3 dimensions, where X is the pitch bend dimension, we have Y for timbre or control change CC74, and we have Z for Aftertouch that appears as channel pressure in MPE. Jamstik has 3 main ways of sending out its information. First, it's via the USB-C, and secondly, it sends via Bluetooth, and third, we have a MIDI TRS output as well. It's possible for us to also connect to rather old school equipment like 5-pin MIDI DIN cables and stuff like this. I did an experiment and set up all 3 of these to send out MIDI at once to see if there were any differences, and there actually was. It's only when you use the USB-C cable into the computer that you can make use of the string envelope Aftertouch that also can be interpreted as either channel pressure or CC74. If you're connecting via Bluetooth, no such string envelope. Exactly the same thing if you're connecting via this TRS-MIDI out. So there is polyphonic bends on all of these. There's only the X dimension that I talked about earlier, but no Y and Z if you're using either Bluetooth or this TRS-MIDI out. So the Jamstik has some pretty unorthodox solutions for its note level messages. where I would normally apply something like channel pressure or CC74 to send along with the node on and node off information on these particular channels. Some of the stuff that would normally go into the global channel, they are actually sending out on a per note basis as well. Stuff like CC7 for volume, for instance. I'm not going to say it's wrong in any way, but it makes it even more noticeable that you need to know exactly what you're doing if you're trying to set up an instrument. I'll show you the differences between using the cable version with the string envelope attached and what happens if you don't use that and try to control a SWAM instrument with a Bluetooth connection or perhaps this TRS-MIDI connection. So if I don't have any MIDI controllers connected, I will get this prompt to choose any of my MIDI inputs. And in this case, I want to try the USB-C first. And that is because I want to show you this string envelope setting up stuff. So I'm choosing the Jamstik MIDI out and close. And it should be for me to just play, right? Okay, having trouble with no sound? Yeah, of course. Then they are asking me to choose either a MIDI controller template or expression MIDI mapping. I will need to choose both of these, of course. But if we go by MIDI controller template to begin with, as luck would have it, I think there's a Jamstik default here. If I click on that and try to play now, they're asking me to change something up, and perhaps I don't know what happens. I mean, I chose the Jamstik MIDI mapping. It should work, right? So I'm going into the expression MIDI mapping, which is the other one. And it says CC11, and that's usually expression. It's not necessarily an MPE quality anyway. But okay, let's go into the Jamstik software and see what settings I'm using. Here's the string envelope tracking sound. So anything that isn't velocity and pitch bend, this is where you find the setting for determining whatever you want to send for that. I see that, okay, they have something that they call expression in the Jamstik setup. Okay, now we're getting somewhere because now this is reacting. It's not in any way standard to send CC11 on a per note basis like this, but they're using the string envelope and they're giving us some alternatives. So here you can choose expression CC11, you can choose channel pressure, which is Aftertouch channel pressure. You can choose volume, and this is also very strange. I'll show you the effect of choosing this in a while. Let's go with expression, since that's what they have chosen to use in this MIDI mapping to the SWAM instrument anyway. We can leave the Jamstik software now. But now you get this very dull dynamic profile from the decaying string. And with the Jamstik algorithm to produce MIDI, you have a very fast decay. So you can look at the expression here. That's where the Jamstik string envelope on expression 11 is coming in. You're probably going to run into issues if you overlap two notes and send two messages, because this means that the SWAM instrument have to deal with two conflicting expression inputs. Let me show you what happens if you use the string envelope volume option. This is sending out CC7 for some sort of control. So now I'm using the string envelope to control the main volume instead. And this is a really strange way for me to work, so probably not what I would use it for. Traditionally, I would absolutely stay with something like channel pressure, but I would also use a breath controller for this. Up till now, I've only showed you stuff that has to do with anything from this cabled connection. Now I want to show you what happens if you go by Bluetooth or this TRS version. So let's go by Jamstik Bluetooth, for instance. And one thing you can look at right away is that this expression meter here, it doesn't react. And that's because I'm not sending any sort of information to the SWAM instrument that can be interpreted as expression right now. I'm only sending velocity and pitch bend information. So I have this TRS connection now over my video host with a little dongle like this. I've tried it cabled all the way and it's exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing. You're not sending any sort of expression information. So if I want this instrument to be a bit more meaty, but you don't get any of this decaying character from the string. And I don't know if you want to use this. Perhaps this is a good thing, because it behaves differently than if you were to include this string envelope. The string envelope makes the SWAM instrument behave more like a guitar string, and without this expression control, you'll get this rather steady note until it dies away completely. And perhaps that's good for you, but there's a difference between using the cabled USB-C version and the TRS-MIDI or the Bluetooth version. Those are not sending out anything for expression. Let me show you something else. Now, with this last example, I just want to illustrate what it means for me to switch between these string envelope destinations, since I can't use both pressure and CC74 at the same time. I must choose one of these, and I'm going to choose a modern synth for this, Equator 2. Equator 2 is a Roli synth. This controller is one of the first things that came out on the market for MPE stuff. So this is a great place to start if we want to assess stuff like the MPE dimensions. If you look in the upper left corner now, you see 5 panels, and they all refer to different gestures that I can use together with this controller. Strike is velocity, and that refers to when I press down on this, how hard I press down will be reflected in strike. So a very light touch will look like this, and a hard strike will look like this. Strike and velocity are momentary values. It's not something that's evolving over time. You'll only get this initial value. And that's all. Glide, that's the pitch bend aspect of things. So you see, I can modulate that by moving around on the keyboard like this. Move between different keys in this manner. Then we have slide, which is this motion. Press that you see afterwards is pressure. And that's the amount of pressure that I'm applying. Lift is another character that we can't really use for guitar, but it has to do with how fast you lift your fingers from having pressed down a key. When I'm talking about the string envelope applications in the Jamstik Creator app, it's only used as a substitute for these two kinds of gestures. Either slide, and that's on CC74, or it's for press. And that would be the Aftertouch or Z dimension. I was talking about the XYZ dimension. If I'm just playing a chord, you can see that strike, slide, and glide seems to move. This would indicate to me that I've set the string envelope to send to CC74, because you see nothing on pressure, for instance. So let's see what the Jamstik software says. Go into device config here, and on the string envelope expression tracking send, you see that I have CC74 sound control 5. If I change this now to channel pressure, you are going to see something else happening up here in the mod panels. You're going to see some movement in pressure, but none in slide right now. If I want this string envelope to be interpreted differently by the specific software that I'm working in, I'm just going to change the way that this particular curve looks. This will change how the string envelope pressure information is received and interpreted by the Equator software. And this is a must if you're going to work with something like the Jamstik that really doesn't have any other capabilities of reshaping its string envelope. So I can do any such reshaping within the instruments like this and get pretty different results from this actually. So if I'm going back now to this CC74, you can hear how these in real time affect the sounds. But the thing that I really wanted to show you is that there is this limitation. You have to choose between either pressure or slide when we're talking Roli speak about the MPE dimensions. It's too bad that I can't use these together because they're really meant to work together. The slide and the pressure in this case, they're meant to formulate this cohesive, unified sound. Both of these parameters are meant to work together. So this will be one of my critiques against the use of the string envelope for either pressure or CC74 when it comes to the Jamstik. I really hope that they would consider and use two different kinds of string envelopes to facilitate both of these dimensions to be used together. So this has been incredibly inspiring and incredibly interesting actually, because this is something that I've been curious about for the longest time. The Jamstik is a better controller than I would expect it when it comes to tracking. It isn't half bad. I mean, it takes care of most of your input in a really decent way. I was pleasantly surprised using the Jamstik, and especially with a breath controller, because it kind of mitigates problems you have with tracking. And there are problems with initial tracking for most pitch to MIDI systems to varying degrees. The thing that I was most interested in finding out about was how Jamstik used MPE, since it is talked about in the videos, and actually the videos from Jamstik themselves, but it's never showcased. So if there are a few things that I would like to have changed, I would love to see a second string envelope, for instance, for CC74 specifically, to have run in parallel to pressure. I would also love to see a revision of their Bluetooth and TRS-MIDI transmission protocols, of course. It's not a problem to send all that MIDI wirelessly via Bluetooth to my computer. I'm doing that with my Roli Seaboard, and I should be able to do that also with the Jamstik. For whatever reason I can't do that right now, I would love to see it change in the future, and I would love being able to use this string envelope also over Bluetooth, so I can use that wirelessly. This has been a really long video, and I'm sorry about that, but I hope you get something out of this, because I've at least looked at a lot of things that at least I haven't seen in any other videos up till now. So I'd love to hear what you think about this. If you're interested in, say, breath controllers or MPE, let me know in the comments, and see you later, and bye.